Luke chapter 19. Some of you have been there for a little while. Probably long enough to read what we're going to read, huh? Luke chapter 19, we're going to start with verse 11 of chapter 19. And as we read through this particular story, realize that Jesus knew in his earthly ministry that there were people who needed to know what was coming in the future because they were so caught up in the present. Matter of fact, a lot of times his own disciples, the 12 that he had fasted and prayed and selected out of the crowds, were the ones who wrestled often with this heaven on earth, let's just stay here kind of mentality. Let's just keep having this forever. Matter of fact, some of you know what I'm talking about. You have been in services. You have been in conferences. You've been in powerful gatherings where you're like, I could just do this forever. And then you get hungry. You got these services that my day, when we had a good service, they forgot the time. In my day, when you had a good church, you just went until. And if you couldn't last as long as the next person, you just got to go and we kept on. That's the way it was when I grew up. And I'm wrestling, but I know that this present time that I'm going through is just setting the stage because I have tasted of that heavenly place where you just want it to last forever. And it is those things that register in my mind that as I look at the time we're in, where we're time sensitive and we're time conscious and we're time burdened and all these things happen, that one of these days when the trumpet sounds and the dead in Christ rise, and if I'm dead, I'm leaving, and if I'm alive, I'll be caught up later. But when I get there, I won't have to worry about time anymore. But Jesus knew he was wrestling with individuals. He was leading individuals who quite hadn't got to that point yet. And this story in chapter 19 of Luke lays this out very real. First of all, it starts in verse 11 when it says, "Now as they heard these things, he spoke another parable because he was near Jerusalem, and because they thought the kingdom of God would appear immediately." Now, let me set the stage just real quickly. Jesus has just had dinner with Zacchaeus. Now, some of you know Zacchaeus is the little man who went up into the tree so he could see Jesus. The rest of the story is Jesus went home with him, and Zacchaeus, out of his conviction about things that he had done wrong in the past, said, "I have restored multiple above beyond what I took as a tax collector." And Jesus said, "This day the kingdom of heaven has come into this house." And when the disciples heard the kingdom of heaven, it's kind of like a buzzword that really got them going. And they were like, "Oh, good, it's coming, it's coming. We're looking to the left, we're looking to the right, we're looking all over. Where is it, where is it, where is it?" Jesus knew they were thinking that. And to help them understand that it needed to be adjusted in their thinking, he shares this story. He says, "Therefore, a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return." Now notice Jesus is telling a parable. In other words, what Jesus is endeavoring to do is help us. Did that just go out on purpose? Okay. All right. Just making sure we weren't having a problem. Is everybody okay now? All right. Good. What Jesus was telling them in a parable was a truth. And hopefully this many years afterwards in all of our Bible study, we can discern some of those, but I'll try to help you as we go along. When Jesus talks about a king in this story, he's referring to ultimately himself, for he is the King of Kings. When it talks about Jesus leaving and establishing something in order to return back again, he's talking about the time when he will leave and he will build a kingdom. He says, "I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, you can be also." But he's coming back. And so that's the setting in which Jesus establishes this particular parable. In verse 13, he says, "So he called 10 of his servants, delivered them to them 10 minas." Now, this is just simply a term for money or finances. In other words, he gave them something they didn't have. Notice this, please. The servants were belonging to the king and his kingdom. So they weren't strangers. They weren't people the king didn't know. They weren't people the king hadn't experienced life with. But they were people who knew the king knew them, and he draws 10 of them in, and he says, you 10 are going to get something you don't have. He gives them each, according to this story, a mina. Verse 13 goes on to say, do business till I come. In other words, I'm going to give you something you do not have, and here's the purpose for me giving it. I want you to be a businessman. Now, you don't have to go to business school. You don't have to have a degree in business to understand that what Jesus is saying here, that you've got a certain amount of time with stuff you haven't been given in order to accomplish something for the kingdom and the king which you are a part of. It's very important for us to understand this, because this truth is an eternal truth, a temporal truth that will ultimately establish our presence or our attitude or our reception before the King of Kings when we stand before him. Verse 14. But his citizens hated him and sent a delegation after him, saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. And so it was that when he returned, having received the kingdom, he then commanded these servants to whom he had given the money, to be called to him, that he might know how much every man had gained by trading. A little commercial here in verse 14. The little verse doesn't seem to fit totally, because the story is Jesus telling that the king leaves to go get a kingdom. Verse 14 tells us that those who were in this kingdom that he was going to go get didn't like him. They didn't want him. And they made it known, we don't want this king to rule over us. But notice what this verse says. It says in verse 14, we will not have this man to reign over us, rejection. Verse 15, and so it was when he returned, having what? Received the kingdom. The king gets what he sets out to get, folks. The king in this story went out to get a kingdom. Before he left, he calls 10 servants in. He gives them something they'd never had, or they didn't have, and says, do business while I'm gone. And while he's gone, he encounters rejection. But the rejection of the people didn't stop the transfer of ownership, did it? Let me open that up just a little bit. When Jesus came to this earth, he came as a babe. We're about ready to celebrate that, right? Some of you are already hearing the songs. John 1 says, he came to his own, and his own received him not. They rejected him. Some cried out, crucify him. But listen, the king is going to get what he came for. And in Matthew 28, after all the stuff was said and done, Jesus said, all power in heaven and earth has been committed unto me. Now go make disciples. That's good stuff right there. Good preaching, Pastor Mike. That's good stuff right there. When the king sets out to get what he wants, what he deserves, what is coming to him, mankind in his egotistic mindset says, let me tell you my opinion. let me give you my 2 cents. And the king says, I heard you, but it's still my kingdom. He goes back. He calls the 10 servants to him. And in a sense, you'll see this. The king says the very same thing to his own servants. I heard you, but it's my kingdom. Notice what he says in verse 15. So it was when he returned, having received the kingdom, he then commanded these servants to whom he had given the money to be called to him, that he might know how much every man had gained by trading. Then came the first, saying, Master, your mina has earned 10 minas. Anybody mathematician here today? What percentage of increase is that? 30 months of wage, but it's a percentage, 100%, right? He took one and got 10. 100%. 1,000. That's incredible, right? That's good. And Jesus, in this story, acknowledges the master's pleasure when the master says in verse 17, well done, good servant, because you were faithful in a very little, have authority over 10 cities. Now, some people wonder, what are we going to do in heaven? And some of you have been told, and you've kind of believed this, that in heaven you're going to go up, and if you make it in, we know what they're going to do in hell: weeping, crying, gnashing of teeth, regret, all that kind of stuff, burning without end, all that. We got that part, but what are we going to do in heaven? And some people have bought into this idea that you're going to be up in heaven and you're going to get in, and then you're going to be given a cloud. There's a cloud with your name on it. And there's a harp up there with your name on it. And you're going to sit in that cloud and just harp away. Matter of fact, one person made the comment that they knew that their spouse was going to be in heaven for sure. Because what you do on earth is preparation for heaven, right? It's dress rehearsal. And they said, I know they're going to be in heaven because on earth they are constantly up in the air harping about something. Verse 18. And the second came, saying, Master, your mina has earned 5 minas. In other words, he gained half as much as the first guy. Now, I want you to note this. The master says, likewise, in verse 19, he said to him, you also be over 5 cities. Now, go back really quick if you got your Bibles and notice the difference in the response of the king between 17 and 19. You know what's missing? Yeah. In other words, I'll give you your reward, but maybe you only did it half-hearted. Verse 20. Then another. Now note we're here real quick. He had 10 servants, right? And all 10 servants received a mina. They all got what they hadn't had before, and they got it. They received it. At this point, they received equal. Another story in Matthew 25, he gives them according to their abilities. But in this story, it's just everybody gets something. The first guy doubles it, 100% increase. Next guy does half that much. The last guy that's noted here, remember there's 10, but we only note 3. In verse 20, then another came saying, Master, here is your mina, which I have kept put away in a handkerchief. For I feared you because you are an austere man. You collect what you did not deposit and reap what you did not sow. And he said to him, out of your own mouth I will judge you. Remember what I said earlier? We're going to be able to help God as he judges us. Out of your own mouth, the king says, I will judge you. You wicked servant. You knew that I was an austere man, collecting what I did not deposit and reaping what I did not sow. Why then did you not put my money in the bank that at my coming I might have collected it with interest? I want to share something that I just learned just this week as I was getting ready for this message. And I've never asked the question before, but why did the guy put it in a handkerchief and bury it? Is that really safer than a bank that's FDIC? You know, you got all the things that they try to sell. You put your money here and we'll take care of it. It's safe. But this guy chose not the bank, which obviously they had some kind of financials back there, but he chose a handkerchief. Not even a Ziploc bag, to keep it from getting dirty. Just a handkerchief. Buries it in the ground. And why did the guy get this kind of response? You wicked servant. Not just slothful. That's what we see in Matthew 25. It says, you wicked and slothful servant. This one just, you wicked servant. Let me tickle your thoughts with this idea. Banks keep records. Handkerchiefs don't. And if he took what he had not had before, received from the king something that precious, the king was going away. Maybe he just needed to put it away because maybe the king wouldn't come back, and then nobody would know where he got that mina from. That's why he said wicked. You put it somewhere where if things didn't work out, you could always have an ace up your sleeve. You'd have a backup. You'd have your own ideas rather than putting it somewhere where somebody could keep track of it. I wonder sometimes if we find ourselves, if not guilty, tempted of some of those very same things. Whereas a Christian, we understand that everything we have, God has given us. And yet, we want to keep a portion to ourselves, not let anybody know, just in case. But that's not why God gave us what he gave us. And we're going to have to give an account for everything he's given us. Verse 24. And he said to those who stood by, take the mina from him and give it to him who has 10 minas. But they said to him, Master, he has 10 minas. The master says, for I say to you that to everyone who has will be given, and from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. But bring here those enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them and slay them before me. Kind of a gruesome ending to this story. But let me tell you, it establishes the fact that the king is the king. And in his kingdom, he rules superior. The Bible says that he is given a name whereby every knee and every tongue will ultimately make that definitive declaration that he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And when we stand before him, as it's laid out in Revelation 20, we will give an account for our lives. Interesting, if you read Revelation 20, it's not just those that are died and buried in the cemetery. It's those that are buried in the sea. It's those that are deceased in areas above and beneath and all the realms. Every human being will stand before him. As a result, we need to realize it'd be wiser to live each day as if it were the last day of your life than to live as if, oh, I got time. Why? Let me read some verses. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1. For we know that if our earthly house, this tent, is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Now for us as believers, we are so excited because it will be the perfect height. It will be the perfect weight. We will have the perfect size shoes. We will have all the right color eyes. Our ears will be perfect. And things we don't like about ourselves are going to be gone. That is not what it said. What it said is, when the stuff of this earth ultimately comes to its God predetermined end, God has another plan when you're done with this. And his plan at that point takes on immortality, takes on eternity. And it matters how we spend this life, because whatever you accumulate in this life as far as your resume will ultimately stick with you in eternity. Good servant, wicked servant. Faithful servant, faithless servant. The challenge for us today is to realize what Paul wrote in Philippians. He wrote for us, but that things which are gain to me, these I have counted loss for Christ. It doesn't mean he gave up everything. He changed the focus of why he had it. Oftentimes we look at the stuff we get and we are out to consume it upon ourselves. Now, give me just a few moments here, because the truth is, this is part of our human nature. When you are walking out in the parking lot and you happen across a $100 bill, the very first thought in your mind, I don't care how saved and sanctified you are or what Holy Ghost service you came out of, the temptation at that point is very human. Lucky me! And that is not demonic. That is God saying, I created you that way to be able to observe and say, this is a good thing. I just found $100 I didn't have before. Here's where Christ takes over. What am I going to do with somebody else's $100? I'll put in a kerchief. I'll bury it so nobody knows and keeps track of it. And then when it's convenient and nobody remembers, I'll use it to further my kingdom. Or the person who comes across the armored vehicle that was collecting money from bank to bank, and the door got left open and the bags are falling out. And we're not talking $100 anymore. We're talking thousands. And the person picks up the bags and goes to the police department and says, these aren't mine. That battle is real. The things that were gain to me, I considered loss. Not that I can't have them, but they're not benefiting me. God, help that which I have to benefit you. Let me close this. There's so much more, and I trust that somehow God will give you the time and opportunity to be able to dig into this. But the bottom line of all of this is every human being that's ever been born has been given three things. We have all been given time, we have all been given talents, and we have all been given treasure. There's been a variety of treasure resources. Some have a lot, some don't have a lot. And the crazy thing is, I've seen miserable people at both ends. And I've seen happy, contented people on both ends. The truth is, we all have resources that we can use. We have talent. Varying degrees of talent. It's crazy how we look at some people who can catch a ball or swing a bat or run or jump, and we say, wow, they're really talented. But they fail at relationships. They fail at integrity. We look at people who have lived 70, 80 years and never been in jail. Is it because they're perfect? No, they're real talented. They never got caught. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. We're all sinners. But the truth is, their ability to take their skills and gifts and use them for lawful living instead of lawless living is a greater talent than some of the people who get all the accolades today. We all are given time. And time for every one of us is an opportunity to do something. Our talent, for whatever degrees we may have or may not have, is that which we were given by God to accomplish something while we're here. Our treasure or our resources that we have, no matter how big or how small, are all given by God to allow us to have an opportunity in time to do something that God is glorified by. How do I know this is true? Ephesians chapter 2. Verse 8 tells us that we're not saved by works of ourselves. It's what Christ did that saved us. Got that? You can't earn it. You can't buy it. You can't loan it. It's done. But if you look at verse 10, it says, we are his workmanship created for good works. What's it do to do work? It takes time. What's it do to accomplish work? What does it take to accomplish work? It takes talent. What does it take to accomplish a job? It takes treasure, resources. And God has given every human being time, talent, and treasure. And then he says, I'm going away. Do business. What is the good works that God has for us? One man put it this way: good works are things you do for God's glory to advance God's kingdom that benefit others in God's name. See, this is where the dying to self comes in. Dying to self is something that we have got to do daily. Jesus said, pick up your cross and follow me. Why? Because every day of our lives, we have got to lay down this selfishness, pick up selflessness, and say, God, let your kingdom come, let your will be done. Let me use my time today. Let me use my talent today. Let me use my treasure today in such a way that it fits that classification, that definition of good works. Things you do for God's glory, to advance God's kingdom that benefits others in God's name. I am so thankful that this life is dress rehearsal. Why? Because during dress rehearsal, you can make corrections. During dress rehearsal, you always have the idea that, you know what? I'm going to work as hard as I can to get it as right as I can, because when it finally comes, I want to be able to do it to its best. We're not going to go into what we do on earth and what we do in heaven. But I will tell you this, some of the things that absorb our time, our treasure, and our talent on this earth, we're not even going to be doing up in heaven. So I challenge you, consider what you have done this last week. Consider what's coming this next week. And remember these two things. Number one, everything we do in word or deed will either advance the kingdom of light or the kingdom of darkness. And you get to choose. Choose smart. Because if you choose stupid, there will always be somebody there to make your life miserable. Secondly, live this next week with the mindset, and maybe you need to write it down on a piece of paper. Put it somewhere where you're constantly looking so that you can remind yourself that everything you do will ultimately you will be held accountable for when you enter the throne room of Christ. That scares some people. Oh no. Well, I'm just a sinner, but God is greater. I've had this problem for years, but God is greater. I'm just human. God is greater. Oh, you know that everybody makes mistakes. God is greater. That's why 1 John says, if we sin, if we confess our sin, he is faithful and just to forgive us. What's that mean? That means that every day you get up and you say, God, forgive me as I forgive others. And then you start forgiving others so that God can keep forgiving you for the things that you just don't want to give up. Jesus did not die for just parts of your struggles. And heaven is not for people who just want to avoid hell. Heaven is for people who want to spend eternity with Jesus. Period. If there's no fishing, they still want to go. If there's no golf, they still want to go. If there's no video games, they still want to go. If you don't like lamb, you don't even like to eat, they still want to go to heaven. You don't like people, they still want to go to heaven.